Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into the world of Polish science. Specifically, we're going to be looking at top performers over the past 3 decades.
3 decades, yeah.
And we'll be guided by this really interesting paper by Kwiek and Roszka. It's titled Top Research Performance in Poland Over 3 Decades, a multidimensional microdata approach.
A catchy title.
Right.
Yeah.
They took this massive amount of data from Scopus, tracked over 152,000 Polish scientists, and nearly 600,000 research articles, all across 15 STEM disciplines, from 1992 to 2021.
That's a lot of data.
It is. So we're going to try to figure out what sets those scientific superstars apart from everybody else. What do you think? Ready to jump in?
Absolutely. And right out of the gate, one of the things that really struck me was this consistency in certain patterns.
Yeah.
Like these 110 and 1050 rules they talk about.
Okay, 110 and 1050 rules, those sound kind of mysterious. What are those all about? And what do they tell us about how scientific success works?
Well, they basically describe this fascinating phenomenon where the top 1% of scientists consistently produce about 10% of Poland's total research output.
Wow.
And then the top 10% contribute a whopping 50%.
50%?
Yeah.
That's a small group with a big impact.
Huge impact. And you know what's really interesting? This pattern holds remarkably stable over the entire 30 years.
Yeah.
Almost like a scientific law in itself.
You'd think with all the changes in funding and technology, even the global research landscape, that those proportions would fluctuate a bit more.
Right.
What could explain that consistency over such a long period?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? It seems to suggest that there are certain factors at play, maybe inherent to individuals even, that have a much bigger influence than we often think. Things like individual drive or access to, top-notch training. Maybe even a little bit of luck sprinkled in there.
So are you saying these scientific superstars, are they just kind of wired differently?
It's possible.
Fascinating. But I am curious how this plays out across different fields of science. Because the paper did mention some variations there, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Distinct disciplinary differences.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, in pharmacology, you see a really high concentration of output from the top performers.
Okay.
But then you look at mathematics, and the research output there is way more evenly distributed.
Interesting. So why would that be? Is it something about how those fields operate or the types of research questions they ask?
I think it suggests that some fields, like pharmacology, might require a much higher level of specialized expertise or resources. Like, think about it, complex lab setups, years of specialized training. It makes the climb to the top much steeper.
Right.
Whereas fields like mathematics might offer a more level playing field in a way, where individual brilliance can kind of shine through, even without huge institutional support.
So it's almost like some fields are more winner-take-all than others?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
But, there's another layer to this whole success story that we can't ignore, and that's gender.
Right. The research dug into the relative presence of men and women in these top performer groups.
Yeah.
And I got to say, the findings were pretty eye-opening.
They were, and unfortunately, this is a story we see repeated across a lot of different fields. There's this persistent gender disparity, with men consistently overrepresented at those top tiers of science.
Yeah.
And to really get into the details of that, the researchers actually developed a specific metric to quantify this overrepresentation.
The Relative Presence Index, or the RPI as they call it. I have to be honest, whenever I come across a new index or a new metric like this, I always get a little bit lost.
Sure.
Could we maybe break this RPI down a little bit? What does it actually tell us, and why is it more helpful than just looking at, raw numbers of men and women in science?
So you're right to ask that.
Yeah.
Because the RPI isn't just about those raw numbers, it's about proportions.
Okay.
So it considers the overall representation of men and women in a given field, and then compares that to their representation within those specific top performer groups. So it's kind of like a zoomed-in view. We're looking to see if there's something unique going on within those top tiers, beyond just the general gender balance in the field as a whole.
Exactly, yeah.
That's really clever.
And it's a powerful tool for understanding these dynamics.
So what does this RPI reveal about gender dynamics in Polish science then? Is it simply reflecting the overall number of women in science, or is there something else going on?
Well, that's the crucial question, right? And the research suggests that there's more to the story than just those overall numbers.
Okay.
Because across almost all the disciplines they looked at, the RPI for men is consistently higher than 1.
Okay.
And especially in those upper echelons of the top performer categories.
So they are overrepresented, even compared to their overall presence in the field.
Exactly.
That's pretty stark. So what's next in our deep dive then? We know there's this gender gap, but how do we explain it? And what factors, besides simply being male, give you an edge in climbing that scientific ladder?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Because to answer those questions, the researchers had to get into some pretty advanced statistical modeling techniques
Okay.
to identify what they call the key predictors of top performance that go beyond those simple demographic factors.
Now, I know we've got some serious data enthusiasts in our audience, but for those of us who aren't fluent in all the statistical jargon,
Sure.
can you break down those findings for us? What did those models tell us about the secrets to scientific success?
Well, one of the major predictors they found was academic age. Essentially, the length of your publishing career,
Okay.
every additional year of experience significantly boosts your odds of reaching those top ranks.
So experience counts.
It definitely counts.
Makes sense. The more you do something, the better you get at it. But what about other factors? Does the type of institution you work for matter?
Right.
What about collaboration? Is it a solo journey to the top, or do you need a team to really excel?
All good questions. And we're going to dig into those right after this break.
So we were talking about how experience plays a role, but is it all about racking up years in the lab? Or does the actual research environment itself make a difference? Like working at a really prestigious, research-intensive institution, does that give you a leg up in this race to the top?
You'd certainly think so, wouldn't you? I mean, you've got more resources, top-notch colleagues, this whole culture that really values research. Seems like the perfect recipe for success.
Right.
But here's where the data gets a bit interesting.
Oh, I love a good twist.
Yeah.
What did the research uncover about these elite institutions?
Well, it turns out working at a research-intensive institution doesn't have as strong an influence on top performance as you might expect. In fact, for some of the top performer categories, working outside those institutions actually had a slight negative association with reaching the top.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
So it's almost like individual drive and talent can sometimes outweigh those institutional advantages?
I think that's a very possible interpretation.
That's both inspiring and a little bit unsettling.
Yeah.
Does this mean the playing field is more level than we think?
It certainly suggests that.
Yeah.
You know, it challenges that assumption that all the best and brightest minds automatically go to those big-name universities.
Right.
Maybe it's the individuals themselves,
Yeah.
their own intrinsic motivation, their passion for science that makes the real difference.
So a brilliant scientist can make groundbreaking discoveries, even without a fancy lab or a prestigious title.
Potentially, yes.
I like that.
I think so.
But, science is rarely a solo endeavor. So what about collaboration then? Does working with others, especially internationally, influence your chances of reaching the top?
Collaboration is huge, absolutely.
Mm.
The models showed a very strong positive correlation between international collaboration and top performance.
Interesting.
It's not just a nice bonus, it's a statistically significant predictor of success, even when they control for other factors like gender and experience.
You're tapping into this global network of knowledge,
That's
different
right.
perspectives, that
Exactly.
specialized expertise.
You're getting the best of the best.
It's like saying many heads from all over the world are better than one.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
But I'm also thinking back to the gender gap we were talking about. Could this collaboration piece be part of the solution there as well?
You know, that's a great point. And it's something the research touches on a bit.
Okay.
Because the models suggest that collaboration might actually help mitigate some of those gender disparities, especially for women scientists.
Okay.
By engaging in these collaborations, they could potentially access those networks and resources that might be less available to them otherwise.
It's almost like creating a more level playing field
Yeah,
where talent and contributions can really shine through,
exactly.
regardless of gender.
That's the idea.
I like that. But going back to this relative presence index, the RPI,
Yeah.
we talked about how it works, but what does it actually tell us about the gender dynamics among these top Polish researchers?
It's a complex picture, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not always what you might initially assume. So, for example, while the overall trend definitely shows an overrepresentation of men, especially in those top 1% and 5% brackets,
Right.
there's some interesting nuances when you bring academic age into the picture.
Okay. So how does age factor into the gender dynamics here?
Well, it seems like that overrepresentation of men is most pronounced among younger scientists. But as scientists gain more experience, as they move through their careers, the RPI gap starts to narrow. especially for those in the most senior ranks.
So there's a wider gap at the beginning of a scientific career,
It seems so, yeah.
but then it seems to shrink as those careers progress.
That's what the data suggests.
Is that a sign that things are slowly improving, or is there something else at play?
It's hard to say for sure without digging deeper. It could be that some of those systemic barriers actually lessen over time. Or it could be that the women who persevere through those early years are just exceptionally talented and driven, and that leads them to catch up later on.
Makes sense.
Definitely a question that warrants more investigation.
Yeah, more research is needed. But it is a hopeful sign that that gap isn't static.
Okay.
But speaking of time, this study spans 3 whole decades.
3 decades, yeah.
It's not just a snapshot. It's a long-term view of how Polish science has evolved. So what does this research tell us about the scientific landscape itself? How has it changed over these years? We've been talking about individual success a lot, but I want to zoom out a bit. Think about the bigger picture. Has the journey to the top of Polish science changed over these 3 decades?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Has it gotten easier? Harder to stand out? What do you think?
Well, it's interesting because their research suggests that it's actually become tougher to reach those top performer ranks over time.
Really? That's kind of surprising.
It is a bit counterintuitive.
You'd think with all the advancements in research and technology and access to information, it'd be easier for those bright minds to kind of make their mark.
Right.
So what explains this increasing difficulty then?
Well, think about it this way. The amount of scientific output has just exploded over these past few decades.
Okay, yeah.
More researchers are publishing more papers than ever before.
It's a lot to keep up with.
It is.
Yeah.
And that creates a much more competitive landscape. It's harder to stand out. It's harder to be recognized as truly exceptional.
Like trying to make a splash in a really crowded pool.
Exactly.
You got to make some serious waves to get noticed.
You do.
So how did the researchers actually measure this increase in competition? Did those statistical models we talked about earlier shed any light on this trend?
They did, yeah. Those models were really key to understanding this dynamic.
Okay.
Remember how we mentioned those fixed effects? Those allowed the researchers to compare how difficult it was to achieve top performer status across those different time periods.
Okay.
Basically slicing time into 5-6 year segments, and then looking at how the odds of reaching the top shifted within each of those segments.
So they were looking for changes in those odds over time.
Exactly.
What did they find?
Well, they found that as you go from the earlier time periods to the later ones, the value of those fixed effects consistently decreases.
Interesting.
Meaning that with each passing 6-year segment, it became statistically more difficult to break into those top performer ranks. And this is even when controlling for other factors like gender, experience, and collaboration.
Wow. So even if you were doing everything right, publishing consistently, collaborating internationally, racking up years of experience, your chances were still shrinking.
In a way, yes.
Simply because the overall competition was intensifying.
That's what the data suggests.
That's incredible.
It highlights this pressure and these demands placed on researchers today.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just be good. You have to be exceptional to truly stand out.
It really paints a picture of this scientific ecosystem that's becoming so much more demanding, where the bar for success is constantly being raised.
It is, yeah.
But is that necessarily a bad thing? I mean, couldn't you also argue that this really intense competition, it pushes people to be more innovative, to strive for higher quality?
Absolutely.
To really push the boundaries of what we know.
I think that's a really important point. It's not all doom and gloom,
Right.
this increasing competition. It's also a reflection of the incredible progress and dynamism of scientific research.
Especially in a place like Poland,
Right.
where we've seen such rapid growth in their scientific community over these past few decades.
It's a testament to the talent and the drive within that community.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have this fierce competition making it harder to reach the top, but on the other hand, it's pushing the boundaries of what's possible, driving innovation forward.
Exactly.
It's like a high-stakes game. But the ultimate reward is advancing human knowledge and understanding.
I like that, the ultimate reward.
So, listeners, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of top performers in Polish science. And we've uncovered some pretty fascinating insights along the way. We learned about these power laws that govern research output.
The 110 and 1050 rules.
Exactly. The role of gender. The surprising importance of individual drive and collaboration.
And this ever-evolving scientific landscape.
Becoming more competitive and demanding.
It is.
But this leaves us with some important questions to consider. How do we best support scientific talent in this changing world? How do we create systems that foster innovation, collaboration, and a true passion for discovery?
Those are the big questions.
They are. So keep those brilliant minds engaged. Keep asking those tough questions and never lose that thirst for knowledge.
That's what it's all about.
Because that's what drives scientific progress. That's what makes this journey of discovery so endlessly fascinating. So until next time, keep exploring.